What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are going to focus on color grading and the difference that color grading makes in your videos. So we're not going to have any audio with this. I might bring in one audio clip just to give it a little bit more depth to the emotion of the clips, but we're just going to do kind of one by one. So right here we have a snowboarder. Why don't we just use that one? And I'm going to interpret the footage. If you haven't seen my speed ramp video, go ahead and check that out in the Adobe Premiere Pro tutorials playlist. There's a way that you can slow this down. Okay, so why don't we do right about here, where, yeah, that looks really solid. Okay. So we'll do that clip. We're going to use this one as well with some friends. And then we'll use this drone clip as well. Actually, let's use a different one. Really, really fast. Here we go. We want this one. Okay, so we can actually go ahead and delete that. All right, so color grading something like this is going to be crucial. All right, so we'll see the difference. All right, so for this very first clip, we'll go to editing. Actually, let's just go to color directly. And the easiest way for you to color grade a group of clips is you basically take is this okay? No. You go down to this new items on the bottom left corner, select that. If you can see the menu, great. If not, there's going to be a menu that pops up and you're going to select adjustment layer. Then it's going to pop up with video settings. So currently I'm shooting at the video is going to be at 1080p full HD. So 1920 pixels by 1080 pixels. And I'm doing it at 23.976 frames per second with square pixels of a 1.0. I'm going to press OK. And then it should appear in your project down in the bottom left corner. It has a pink box next to it, so you're going to select it, drag it, and drop it. And we're going to go ahead and do it over all three videos. So we are color grading all three, even though they all have very different color schemes to start. So not a whole lot of color, a little blue, kind of cooler. Then we have hyper exposed here, so it's a little darker, not as saturated. And then we have the drone footage, which has a cine style, kind of muted, but very, very colorful. So why don't we have something that's kind of dreamy? So basically what we're going to do is we're going to select that adjustment layer, and you're going to go over to your lumetri color and just start kind of messing around. So if we want something that's dreamy, we don't want it underexposed. Let's go ahead, overexpose it a little. Contrast, we don't really want it to go high, so lower, bringing out a little bit more detail. Let's reduce a little bit of the highlights, maybe raise the whites a tiny bit. Shadows can go down a lot, and then blacks. If you can see what this does to the blacks, so there is going to be black in the shadows, black in his outfit, the snowboard, and in the sky. But basically what this does, if you raise it a little bit, it kind of gives it a hazy look, almost like that faded film, and we'll reduce the saturation. And then here in creative tab, you have the same kind of deal. You have your faded film, but this is going to fade everything, not just the blacks. So let's go ahead and kind of go a little overboard with that, 43-ish. We don't need to sharpen it a whole lot. We're not shooting, it's at 1080p everything was pretty well in focus. We don't need to over sharpen it, otherwise it's just gonna look too digital. I like having colors be really bright. So the vibrance is important to kind of raise, and then your saturation you can kind of lower a little bit again. Let's go to the curves tab. Now there's 2 points for your highlights and your shadows, and then you can create more points as needed, but I'm gonna lower the highlights, raise the shadows, so you get a little, again, at that faded film effect. Then you're gonna lower the darks a tiny bit, raise the lights a tiny bit. So you're still getting a little bit of an S, it's just not as exaggerated. Now for hue versus saturation, hue versus hue, we can use that individually on these next 2 clips, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. But let's go ahead, we'll create 2 new adjustment layers just so I can kind of show you what it looks like with and without it. All right, so the color wheels, we can mess around with this if you want. So basically midtones, you have your shadows and your highlights. Typically you want to do what the opposite is. For shadows, you know, typically that's going to be darker in the purples and blues in real time, but we want it to have a little bit more range. So we're going to go on the warmer side. Highlights can go on the cooler side. And then midtones can go in the range of what you're feeling. If you want it to be a little bit more blue or cooler, you can go in that range, or if you want to stay in the warm range, I would typically stay around where the shadows are. So I'm going to go slightly to the red, and then the shadows a little bit more to the yellow. And I'm going to raise the shadows, lower the midtones, and lower the highlights. And the highlights I'm going to have in that cyan area to keep it a little cooler. And we can go up here as well and mess around with the temperature. I'm going to keep it relatively cool because of the shadows being warm and the midtones being warm, this is going to automatically be pretty warm. So, and then we can always do a little vignetting, not too much, and feather. And so this is kind of what it comes out to be. Kind of dreamy, not super oversaturated. Same thing here. It's a little hazy, not a ton of color. And then same thing for the drone footage. It's a little overexposed at the beginning, but still kind of dreamy. So why don't we mess around here? We'll take off these, off that. We'll leave that, and then why don't we mess around here with our curve, our hue versus saturation. So basically what this is going to do is, depending on where you place your point, it's going to raise that color and hue. So play around with it. So obviously the higher you go, the more saturated everything is. The less you go, the less saturated. So I'm gonna kind of want like an autumny feel. So kind of warm. The cooler colors can kind of disappear a little. And then why don't we go down to this hue? Basically, you're going to go through this range of hue versus hue. So I want it to be a little warm, and then bring it down a tiny bit, but I want stuff to stay kind of like in that autumny feel. And then your hue versus luma, that's basically your vibrance, how bright your colors are. So I want it to be kind of dark, and then have the warm color here, let's say orange-ish, be pretty bright. Or you can always lower it so you don't have those sun flares. But I kind of like the flares. They look kind of cool. So we'll go ahead and raise that up. And so this is kind of what it looks like now. Slight difference, I guess, if you want to see what it looks like with and without. So this is with the top adjustment layer. This is with the bottom. Now, if we take it even further, you can see a bit of a difference. So on the far left, you have both. you have both the the color wheel, or sorry, the curves with the color adjustments. And then you have the top, which has all the adjustments that we did previously. And then in the middle, you have just the color adjusted, right? I mean, looking at it, it looks so crisp. It looks so nice. And then on the very, very right, you have that cine style, I guess, quote unquote, raw data. So it's still kind of hazy. It hasn't been touched yet. It looks great. If we come over here, looking at this half and half, we can see what we've done to the footage. Now I can see it's a little purpley. Why don't we bring it down a tiny bit with the green? We don't want it to be vomity. We want it to match a little bit more of the white, not so much the blue-green that's here. That's kind of what it looks like. So it's a little warmer on this side. All right, very nice. Okay, so here, there's no adjustments now. Why don't we go ahead and mess around with the color? So this is where color is going to be huge. Like if we raise that all the way up, see how saturated it is. If we lower it and kind of do, again, more of an autumn feel, can go kind of like that. Lower it just a tiny bit so we still get some of the greens from the pines and green from the aspens that haven't changed color. And then we're going to do the same thing with the vibrance. So on the cooler side, we're going to lower that a little, and then on the warm side, raise that up so those yellows, oranges, and reds pop. And then we can keep coming down here. So again, this is going to be more saturation and even more saturation. Now we don't want to do too much saturation. It's not going to be super ideal. And what I normally like to do is like to make peaks so that there is saturation in certain sections, but it's not all going to be overwhelming. So you can kind of play around with how each I guess quadrant works and what it's affecting. So if I'm lowering this side, you can kind of tell the warmer colors are getting less saturated. And then on this side, it's going to be the blues, but you're still retaining that red, orange, yellow, and green section, which is always nice. So let's go ahead, reduce some of the blue. We can raise that, reduce this a tiny bit. So you can make a peak with this. And then I usually do a reverse peak with this one because this is going to be very subtle changes. Unless you drag this all the way up, everything else is rather subtle. So you're just adjusting to what you want it to look like. All right, so why don't we go ahead and drag this over. Okay, so now we have, why don't we go ahead, do the same kind of deal here. So we have the, on the very far left, we have both layers adjusted. This is going to have your curve, color curve, and all the other adjustments we did in this top layer. The middle section is just our color curve and not our white curve, our RGB curve. And then the very right side, unedited, cine style, raw drone footage. When we put them together, when I go half and half here, we'll do the same thing with this clip as well. I'm gonna be honest, you can kind of tell on this one, I personally do still like the color grade that we did just with the adjustments and no color curves. On that second clip, definitely a little bit dreamier, a little bit more sunset-y on this side. But if you're wanting a more realistic, crisp style to the footage, then the right side is definitely going to work to your benefit, and also add that little sun flare there. Super cool. And then we have our drone footage. Now it becomes a little bit more difficult to discern. You can still tell because it's side by side. I like the left side a little bit more because I think it's going to mute the overexposed sections. So why don't we go ahead? See how the rocks are less exposed, or they're less exposed in this layer than if I were to completely take this one off, roll it back. Everything's just a little bright. We could do a little bit more adjusting there. Granted, that's also just the drone doing its thing, trying it to adjust to the lighting, but you can always color grade and fix that slightly. But I like this a little bit more. I like how it's a little bit more muted. You don't have overly saturated colors. And that's kind of what I was going for. But color grading is a huge deal. Why don't we just add a tiny bit of music just to really put in to perspective how much color grading does matter. Not only does it matter, obviously audio is a huge deal, and that's going to be another video at another time. So you can see how big of a difference that makes. Let's say we don't have any color grade here. So our color grading is all gone. And let's make a couple points here to boom. Save your project. Okay, without color grade. Let's put that color grade back on. Now again, we're not telling a story with this video. I'm just kind of demonstrating the difference between a color grading and non-color grading. A little bit more to the video there because of the color and with the audio. Granted, this is probably not the best demonstration of how to best color grade videos, but I am trying to just demonstrate how color grading does make a difference when it is coming to your videos. If you do like this video, go ahead, like, subscribe. And if you have any other questions, please write in the comments. If you have any feedback, I would love to hear it. You can always go to my channel and go ahead and type something in the discussion page, or just, again, put something in the comments. Let me know how I can make this channel better, what I can do to improve. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.